Hello, welcome everyone. It's lovely to see some of us back here and hopefully many more for our second session. So, this week I thought until people come in, I start with some music. So, there's also a sound check of sorts. Okay, we have more people joining us. So, I'll just wait for a minute more before we start. Hi, welcome. Hello, everyone. All right, I think we can start. Okay. Hello. Wow. Hi. So many, some people who I haven't talked to in a very long time. Wow. Okay. Okay. So, hello everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you're seeing this from. And if it's middle of the night where you are, then thank you for joining. Um, so, last time, what we did was we saw what a tempo pattern is, something that sounds like this. All right. And we saw how we can have a number of patterns, slow them down, speed them up, and you can do so many things just by changing the tempo, just by changing the speed of a pattern. So, for those who haven't seen the first episode, what we did was we took, let's say, a pattern A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D, and we slowed it down A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D, and we sped it up A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D. So we saw how the same pattern retains its recognizability no matter what the speed. So this week, since this is rhythm for all, so I had a number of questions coming in, a lot of feedback, and hopefully I can incorporate all that into this episode and the episodes following this. So, what we can start out with is do something very basic. Just a couple of what so-called beats. So we can just try out a couple of them. All you have to do is just follow along with me. Okay, we're not even going to use a metronome for this. Let's just start easy. So just clap along. Copy along as best as you can. All right, let's do one more. Welcome to the people joining us. For those joining us just now, just try to copy the beat. Clap along. This is like a warm-up. All right, let's do one final one. All right, cool, wonderful. Now that we have our hands warmed up, hopefully. Okay, so last time we talked about events and spaces. Sounds very technical, I know. All it is any change is an event. So that's an event. That's two events. That's three. So anything, just a clap saying ABC, that's three events. So AB, ABC, that's three events. So what we need to know is there are events and we can see there's some spaces between these events. So A, B. So there's some time between A and B. So A, B, C. A, B, C. So A, B, C. A, some space, B, some space, and then C. So last time we were talking about counting or measuring how much space there is between events. So for the pattern A, B, C, D, what we did last time was we saw it's A, B, C, D. A, B, C, D. So we see that between A and B there's space that's, this big. And between B and C there's a space that's this big. Between D and A there's a space that's that big. So we were trying to find how events are related to one another, how they're related to each other in time, what the pattern is. So this week, what we're going to do is we're going to simplify it a bit. We're going to think of an event and a space as a long event. So let me show you what I mean. So if I have A, B, A, B, A, B. All right, so there's equal space between A, B and B and A. Now if I have A, B, A, B, A, B. So there's the space between B and A is a little more than between A and B, right? So we have A, B, A, B. So what we think of this as, what we can think of this as is A is a short event, B is a long event. Okay. So last week we were talking about fast and slow in the sense that if I have a basic tempo pattern, a bunch of events where the space is the same between each of them. So if I have, that's a tempo pattern. I can have a slow tempo pattern, which is, or I can have a fast tempo pattern, which is, all right? So that's slow and fast. Now, what we're talking about today is short and long. So, what is short and long? So, within a pattern, if you want to see, how big an event is, how long an event lasts. So, we're going to talk about the length of an event. So, like we said, like we just did earlier, A, B, A, B. So, B is a long event and A is a short event. Okay, so now let's just try to do some. Let's try to actually do some rhythm that involves long and short events. So first, I'll set it to a slow tempo. There was actually someone had asked me to talk a little more about the metronome, so I'll do that now. So we have something called a metronome. So I'm just using an app over here. So you can set the number of beats per minute. You can set how fast you want it to go, how slow you want it to go. So the more beats per minute you have, the faster it is. Okay. So now when I'm setting a speed, I'm going to set it right now at around 55 beats per minute. So that's going to sound like this. Okay. So I can even set it slower. So let's set it to 40. So that's nice and slow. So all we need to do is clap along with the beat. So if you don't want to clap, we can also say A, B, C, D. A, B, C, D. Okay? A, B, C, D. Very nice. A, B, C, D. Keep it up. A, B, C, D. Okay, let's make it a bit faster. So just slightly. All right. A, B, C, D. A, B, C, D. A, B, C, D. So what we did over here was we made the tempo itself faster. We made the pattern feel much faster. So A, B, C, D. A, B, C, D. Keep it going. A, B, C, D. A, B, C, D. Nice. A, B, C, D. A, B, B, C, D. A, B, C, D. A, B, C, D. A, B, C, D. Very nice. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to make the events longer. Okay, so we're going to keep the same tempo. We're going to keep the same click. We're going to keep this going, but we're going to make each event longer. So how are you going to do that? A, B, C, D. A, B, C, D. A, B, C, D. Very nice. A, B, C, D. Okay? So you see how each event is now longer? Instead of just saying A, B, C, D, we're saying A, B, C, D. A, B, C, D. Very nice. Okay. Now we are going to make it even longer. Okay, how are we going to do that? A, B, C, D. A, B, C, D. A, B, C, D. All right? So that's even longer. So let me show you all three of them so that you can have a reference of how they're getting longer and longer. First we have A, B, C, D. A, B, C, D. Then we have A, B, C, D. A, B, C, D. And then we have A, B, C, D. A, B, C, D. Alright? And now we're going to do just one final long event. Now this is going to be the longest of them all. So it's going to be A, B, C, D. A, B, C, D. A, B, C, D. All right. So we did 4 lengths, so to speak. So we did, the first one was just A, B, C, D. If this is the metronome, I was doing A, B, C, D. Then we did A, B, C, D. Then we did A, B, C, D. And finally we did A, B, C, D. And A. Okay, so that's about length. So when do we use fast and slow, and when do we use long and short? So fast and slow generally when an entire pattern moves up or down in tempo. If it becomes faster or slower in the sense of, if I have a pattern A, B, C, D, the same pattern we did last time. So A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D. So the second one was slower than the first one. The entire pattern became slower. When we talk about long and short, within a pattern, if I have A, B, C, D. So now A and B were of one kind of length. C was really short and D was much longer. So we have A, B, C, D is so long. A, B, C, D. So C was so short. A, B, C, D. So we have 3 lengths, 3 events of different lengths here. A, B is one type, C is one type, and D is one type. So A, B, C, D. A, B, C, D. Okay? Cool. Next. So here's the thing about long and short. We could count. We could say A1, B1, C, D1, 2. Or we could say, we could count A as 2, B as 2, C as 1, D as 3. We could do these things. But personally, I have experienced that when we feel the lengths, when we feel how much time passes instead of just counting it, once we get an intuitive feel for how it is, our sense of rhythm becomes much less calculative, and Sure, there's a place for counting, but feeling the rhythm and just knowing how long something is in relation to something else uh, improves our skill and makes us connect to rhythm and time in a much, much more intuitive way. So, to help with that, what we can do is we can name events according to their length. Okay. So, what do I mean by that? So, suppose I have, let's say, three lengths of events, three types of events. So, one is going to be, that's the length of these events. Okay. They're just that short. Another length is going to be, that's the other length. And the third length we're going to have is, so that's going to be our three events. Okay. And we're going to name them now. Why are we going to name them? Think of it, think of them as objects. So if I have this phone here, I call it a phone. When I do call it a phone, I know that it's a phone, which is why I'm calling it that. It's not arbitrary. So in the same way, if we can name lengths of time relative to one another, we'll have a much better idea of how all these so-called words fit together to form sentences. Okay? So let's name them. So we could use the ABC D that we've been using, but since that gets a little hard to say when, especially at faster speeds, so what we're going to do is we're going to call we're going to use three different letters: D for dog, K for kangaroo, and M for monkey. So D, K, M. Okay. D is going to be the shortest one. So this is D. D, 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 D. Okay. Next we have K. So we're going to have K, 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 K. Okay. And next we're going to have M. M is the longest. M, M, M. Okay. This may seem a bit strange to use these three letters. So let's just practice with it to get a bit used to it. So let me increase the tempo even a little, just a tad higher. Okay. So first, let's just practice D. D, 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 D. Okay, now let's practice our Ks. K, 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 K. Okay, and now let's practice our M's. M, 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 M. All right, now let's use them in, by mixing them up. Okay, first let's try KDD. Okay, we're just going to repeat this pattern of KDD. So this is how it's going to sound. K, D, D, 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 K, D, D. Okay. So for those joining us now, what we're doing is we're taking three types of events of different lengths. So we have D, K, and M. D is the shortest, K is longer than that, M is much longer than that. And we're trying to just figure them out and try to use them in a way that becomes more intuitive to us. So let's do this one again. K, D, D, K, D, D, K, D, D, K, D, D. All right, let's do one more. Now we're going to do D, K, D. Okay, so it's going to be D, the short one, K a bit longer, and D. So D, K, D, 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 D, K, D. Okay. Now let's just do M. So M, 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 M. Okay. Now let's join them up. Okay. So let's join KDD and DKD. Okay. So this is how it'll sound. K, D, 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 K, D, 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 K, D, 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 K, D. Okay. Now let's join. In fact, let's do something else first. Let's do D, 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 K. Okay. So it'll sound like this. D, 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 K. 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 Okay. Now let's make this a bit longer. Let's do D, 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 K, D, 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 M. So how will that sound? D, 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 K, D, 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 M. 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 All right. Now let's try a very simple pattern, which is D, 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 M. Okay. How will that sound? D, 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 M. D, 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 M. D, 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 M. Okay. Now we've done a couple of patterns. Let's try to join them all together. So don't worry, we'll do it one step at a time. So first we have K, D, 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 K, D, M. K, D, 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 K, D, M. K, D, 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 K, D, M. Okay, let's do a different pattern now. Let's do K, D, D, K, D, D, M. Okay. K, D, D, K, D, D, M. K, D, D, K, D, D, M. Now let's do D, K, D, K, D, D, M. So we have D, K, D, K, D, D, M. D, K, D, K, D, D, M. Okay, now let's do a third thing, which is D, oh, D, 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 K, D, 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 M. D, 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 K, D, 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 M. In fact, let's make it a bit faster since we are getting a good hang of this. So, K, D, D, K, D, D, M. So you try. K, D, D, K, D, D, M. I'll show it again. K, D, D, K, D, D, M. Now you try. K, D, D, K, D, D, M. Very nice. Next. D, K, D, K, D, D, M. D, K, D, K, D, D, M. Now you try. D, K, D, K, D, D, M. Very nice. Third one. D, 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 K, D, 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 M. You try. D, 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 K, D, 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 M. Again. D, 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 K, D, 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 M. Alright, and finally, D, 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 M. That's simple. D, 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 M. Okay, now how does all of this sound when put together? Let's write 2 lines at a time now. So we're going to talk about lines, okay? So these are words, and words make some sentences, and now we have 4 sentences. So our first sentence is K, D, D, K, D, D, M. Our second sentence is D, K, D, K, D, D, M. Our third sentence is D, 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 K, D, 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 M. And our fourth sentence is D, 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 M. Okay? So I'll do each line twice. Okay? So you follow along. K, D, D, K, D, D, M. K, D, D, K, D, D, M. D, K, D, K, D, D, M. D, K, D, K, D, D, M. D, 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 K, D, 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 M. D, 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 K, D, 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 M. And finally, D, 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 M. D, 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 M. Okay, now let's do that once each. I hope you remember it. If not, please watch this again at some point in time and just try it. K, D, D, K, D, D, M. D, K, D, K, D, D, M. D, 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 K, D, 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 M. D, 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 M. Okay, again. K, D, D, K, D, D, M. D, K, D, K, D, D, M. D, 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 K, D, 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 M. D, 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 M. All right. Okay. Let's make that a bit faster. Ready? K, D, D, K, D, D, M. D, K, D, K, D, D, M. D, 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 K, D, 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 M. D, 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 M. Okay? Let's make it a bit faster. Maybe faster than that. Okay? Try it out. K, D, D, K, D, D, M. D, K, D, K, D, D, M. D, 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 K, D, 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 M. D, 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 M. Again. K, D, D, K, D, D, M. D, K, D, K, D, D, M. D, 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 K, D, 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 M. D, 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 M. Okay, so if you notice, there are some phrases that repeat. So especially at a faster tempo, we're able to see the phrases instead of spelling out each event. So each event is like we're spelling out the word, but if you look at the event as a whole, it becomes more like a word that we're able to um, parse in our minds. So the first phrase we have is KDD. Okay, so that repeats twice. So it K D D K D D M. So the first line has KDD KDD M. The second line has DKD KDD M. Okay, so it's similar to the first, but just the first phrase is a bit different. So KDD KDD M, DKD KDD M. Then we have a bit of a change. We have DDDK DDD M. And finally, we have DDDDDDDM. So let's do it at a faster speed. K, D, D, K, D, D, M. D, K, D, K, D, D, M. D, 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 K, D, 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 M. D, 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 M. All right. So, um, that is how one way we can use long and short. When we listen to any rhythm, think of how long each event is. So if we have something like a D, something like a K, something like an M, something bigger, something in between, try to just recognize it. You need not name it with letters, but sometimes naming it in some way helps. It helps us remember. So as long as we can see that two events are of the same or different lengths and what length each event is, that's good enough. So if you remember, for those who came in early or around 9, I started off this session with some music. So, so if you remember what I played, I'll play it again. Okay. All right. So, this particular thing that I just played, let's look at what rhythm goes into it. How do we know what rhythm it's made of? If we had to reproduce it or even understand it so that we could improvise with it, what how do I know what rhythms are there inside? So we do the same things we did so far. So let's look at the first line, okay? If you notice, there are 4 lines in this. The first line is, that's the first line. The second line is, that's the second line. The third line is, okay? And the fourth line is, all right? So let's look at the first line. Does that seem familiar to you, that rhythm? So if I were to say what we've been saying so far. So remember the first line of our rhythm, K, D, D, K, D, D, M. Okay? Now let's look at this. K, D, D, K, D, D, M. K, D, D, K, D, D, M. Right? It's the same rhythm. So it's just that I've put some notes on it. The events have changed. Instead of saying K or D or M, I'm playing some pitches at those particular times. So K, D, D, K, D, D, M. What was our second line? D, K, D, K, D, D, M. Right? So K, D, D, K, D, D, M. D, K, D, K, D, D, M. Right? D, K, D, K, D, D, M. So K, D, D, K, D, D, M. D, K, D, K, D, D, M. What was our third line? D, 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 K, D, 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 M. Okay, let's look at the third line here. D, 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 K, D, 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 M. D, 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 K, D, 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 M. Okay, so from the start we have K, D, D, K, D, D, M. D, D, K, D. Oh, it's hard to play and sing at the same time. Okay, K, D, D, K, D, D, M. D, K, D, K, D, D, M. D, 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 K, D, 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 M. And what is the final line? D, 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 M. And what is that sound here? Right? So D, 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 D. It's the exact same rhythm. So D, 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 M. Okay, so now if I play the entire tune that I've been playing, it's right. It's, and if I were to sing, if I were to say it in terms of the letters, so it's K, D, D, K, D, D, M, D, D, sorry, K, D, D, K, D, D, M, D, K, D, K, D, D, M, D, 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 K, D, 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 M, D, 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 M. And so this is one way in which you can use rhythm. It doesn't have to, it doesn't have to be music. It can be anything, because rhythm is time, and you can put anything. You can do anything with time. I mean, we live with time, we experience time. So any action that we do, any event that happens, it's all in this realm of time. So it can be movement in the sense of dance. It can be in film. It can happen in editing. It can happen while you speak. The way I speak right now, where I pause, where I go fast, where I go really slow to get your attention, it all makes a difference to delivering the content of that message. The medium is time. So, this is actually a question that I got this week, and let me read out that question in its original wording for you. So the question was, as a layman, what's the final goal of the sessions? I'll go on. I attended the one last Saturday. It was really nice. When it started, I thought, cool, I can do this. By the end, especially when the tempo went faster, things got challenging. So what's the final goal of the sessions? Fair point. So there is a bit of challenge involved, as with developing any skill. So when we develop skill, it's okay to fail. It's okay to not get right. It's okay to not understand certain things. It's fine. It comes with practice. So, if you look at this if you watch this video again, if you try it out on your own, you watch other videos, read a bit, join up with friends who are into rhythm, you can do amazing things with rhythm, right? It is applicable in so many areas in our lives. Um, so, yes, there is a bit of challenge, but now about what are these sessions for? Why are we even doing this? Um, there too many to name, but personally, what gives me satisfaction is being able to understand patterns in time and being able to compose patterns in time, making something with these patterns. And what do I make? I make something that expresses my intention. So when so for this class, I made this last night. So sure, I made it for this live session, but more important to me at the time of composing was engaging with the time, engaging with the notes, engaging with the events themselves, and how they related to one another. So I really wanted to do this. So I just thought it would also be a good idea to maybe show you what happens behind the scenes, right? So the rhythm really determines what comes out from that music. If I just played these same notes, it's just, it's different. Playing it just straight, it doesn't have the same effect, but it has a much different effect. So, yes, this is why I personally wanted to do these sessions, and I thought others could also experience the joy of being able to understand patterns in time and using it in whichever domain they wanted to use it. So, like I said, it could be film, it could be theater, it could be music, it could be speech, it could be poetry. And speaking of poetry, I don't know how many of you noticed, but there is this comment I left here just before starting the session. I'll read it out, especially for those who are not here and will be watching this video later. So, what I've written is, how does a wish stay alive? Pushing to reach what it sees. Many have asked and many will. Who will fail and who will find the key? Okay. You could call it poetry. Uh, so that's 4 lines. How does a wish stay alive? Pushing to reach what it sees. Many have asked and many will. Who will fail and who will find the key? Some may have thought, why did Anirudh write this? So, if you notice, let's go back to the rhythm we did. So K D D K D D M, right? How does a wish stay alive? K D D K D D M. Pushing to reach what it sees. D K D K D D M. Many have asked and many will. D D D K D D D M. And finally, who will fail and who will find the key? D D D D D D D D M. Right? It's the same rhythm. Like I said, one rhythm, the events can change. It can be words, it can be notes, it can be harmonies, it can be movements, it can be so many things. This is, to me, the magic of rhythm and time. And I love it. So I thought, why not share this with everyone? So that's about it for this time. Now, time for questions. Oh, we already have a question. Okay. Just curious to see what the same notes feel like if the long or shortness of each note is changed slightly. Yes, fair point. Okay, I think you mean with what I was playing. So Okay, if I do, instead of, let's say, KDD instead if I do DKD, okay, so one is, the other is, there's this subtle change in what is expressed. So this long, short, short, long, short, short, this has a certain effect because the first notes gain prominence in those phrases. So you have K, D, D, K, D, D, M. So these gain more prominence. And now D, K, D, D, K, D, M. Now a different set of notes get emphasis. So wherever I raise my eyebrows strangely, that's the part I was talking about. Right? So now those notes gain prominence, and because they gain prominence, you notice them more. Longer notes, you notice something that happens for a longer time, you generally have more time to observe it. So the really short notes you observe less, they become more like fillers. So one is K, K, M, the other is K, M, right? So in fact, the entire piece could change with this. So that's one way to do it. And sorry. So I changed even the second line. So that's one. There's this subtle change in what notes get emphasized and what happens as a result of those notes gaining more or less emphasis. And this is just with music. It can happen with so many things. In dance, a certain gesture, a certain movement, if it is done slowly, gains more prominence. You observe it more. If it happens fast, it becomes a filler. And there are things that are always emphasized, and there are things that are always less emphasized. And the balance between both, when it is maintained, the message shines more clearly. So when your intention is geared in such a way that you are consciously aware of what you're trying to emphasize and what you're not, what you're trying to make as filler, you have more control over what message you really want to convey to others, or even just if you're listening or you're watching. Okay, so I hope that answers that question. All right, any more questions? Were there any more questions that I had to answer? No, I think that was pretty much it. Oh, there's, how do you get better at stabilizing the tempo? Okay. How do you get better at stabilizing the tempo of your internal metronome or making it resonate with something you're listening to? Okay. It's actually, in my mind, the simplest practice that you need to do to stabilize your internal metronome. So what he means by so Karan has asked this question. What he means by an internal I know he's a musician, he's a violinist actually. So the internal metronome is, instead of having something out here telling you, to, instead of that, what we can do is we stop that and we develop the metronome inside. So I think I talked about this the first episode, where we internalize the metronome in such a way that we don't need this. We can just, it's already happening in our minds, right? So to get really good at this, what I did personally was I used the metronome first. So I used to just start it at some tempo. Let's say it's 76 right now, 76 BPM, beats per minute. And now what I did was I clapped. I clapped with it for a very long time. So okay, now we can all clap to it. Where things get really interesting is if you focus completely on this and make sure that the sound of your clap and the sound of the metronome are exactly coinciding. I mean, nothing like no gap. So it should be exactly with it. And in fact, if you do it really right, sometimes what happens is it becomes indistinguishable. Your clap and the metronome. Okay? So try to get it exactly coinciding with the metronome click, and you will notice that you will start observing time. You will begin to observe how long it takes, and you can let your body go on autopilot. At our body is really good at trying to maintain a tempo. So we have to really let it, but to first show it what tempo to maintain, we need to just focus on it a bit. So if you focus on the metronome, if you focus just clapping with it and getting it exactly right, and there's never anything with this as perfect. You can always get better and better and better. And then what you do is, so the app I use, it's called Metronomerous. It has the option of having some metronome clicks audible and then some inaudible, inaudible. So if I were to set two audible and one inaudible, so that's one thing to do. If I increase the number of inaudible beats, so that's where things get a bit challenging. So now I've set it to 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. So clearly I'm not doing too well with that. So even I need to practice this a bit. Okay. So how this helps is 1, 2, and now you maintain it without losing track of the beat. Right? So with a bit of practice, even someone like me can do it in 5 minutes. So I'm sure all of you can definitely do it. Okay? So try to practice this. The app is called Metronomerous. I know this is available on Android phones. I'm just posting it in the comments. So I posted in the comments. It's called Metronomerous. It's free. There's a free version. There is also a supporters edition version if you wish to support the developer. I found this app to be pretty good. So there are many apps there. You can use whatever suits you, to be honest. All right. So that was it. If there are any more questions, I'm still willing to spend some more time to answer them. If not, then yeah, I can see you all next time. This was an especially long session. I did not expect it to be this long, but I will try to reduce the length a bit because I know everyone has limited time. No pun intended. Um, all right. It seems like no more questions. So it's great to have you all here. I'm so glad you could make it. And I hope you join us for every session from now on. I love doing this, and I would love to hear more questions. I would love to learn more from you because I have a long way to go in this too. I'm just sharing a bit of what I've done these last few years. So please, if I have said anything that you think maybe isn't right, please tell me. And I am always looking for feedback and suggestions, how to make this better, how to get all of you involved more. Um, if possible, I'll start a group of some sorts. We can join there and we can maybe talk a bit more about rhythm. And you can share what you do in terms of rhythm. Maybe I'll set that up sometime next week and I can send you a link. Until then, great having you, and I hope to see you all next time. So this is Rhythm for All. So see you until next time.